Okay. For those joining this live stream, this is a continuation of a series of meetings about the calculus of annotations for things. So let's try to summarize where we got to last time. Okay. So we've got things. Okay. So case one, there's the annotation things that can have annotations inside them. Okay. And that includes things like image, things like audio, etc. Okay. And for that, we have the notion of annotation information and annotation rules, correct?
Right.
People hear me? Okay, so there's annotation information and annotation rules. And annotation rules generally have the feature that they are of the form where, arrow, what. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So, well, when I say inside them, I mean that can have annotations in their wrappers. Okay. Another case is things that have annotation in their elements. Okay. And this relates again to missing and things like that. So an example of that would be the list 1, 2, and then something that says annotated, blah, 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 blah. Am I making sense? Does that make sense to people?
Yep.
Okay. So then there are things, raw constructs that need an outer annotation wrapper, I believe. See, this is the analog. So this is the analog of annotation information because it is a whole object annotator, right? Does this make sense? So an example of raw object that need an outer annotation wrapper, the most quintessential case is annotated string. That makes sense to people?
Why is it different to annotated?
I'm sorry?
Why is there? Sorry, I wasn't there in previous meeting, so.
Okay, right. So the issue is that this is a where arrow what case. Where arrow what? So you can absolutely say annotated, but this is saying that there are inner annotations in the string. Do you see what I'm saying? So whereas here we would say audio of raw audio comma annotation rules arrow blah blah blah. See what I'm saying? Where arrow what?
And in the second case, what would we put in annotated?
For which?
For things that have annotation in the elements.
Just annotated.
Yeah. Just the what?
Yeah, that's just the what. Well, no, yes, that's just the what. That's the thing, and that's the what. Right? Because we don't need to say where it is. We don't need to tell it where to burrow to put the thing, because the thing is just sitting right there. And similarly here, we could say audio, raw audio, annotation information, arrow what. Make sense?
Do we also want to support annotated of audio? Which potentially could then fill up the annotation information or stay as is.
Yeah, well, okay, so that's a question, right?
Right, right.
Could it support both annotated? Like if it's a list of rules, then you understand that it's a local thing, and if it's just another list of rules, it's a global annotation. Well,
For
I guess
which?
it
For
can
annotated?
be, yeah.
Well, look, the question of annotated string. Right. I mean, so the question is, does annotated string? Okay, that I think that's still a detail. Let's keep going on the main issue here. Okay, so here, look at this. You know, we've got a classifier of image, picture, annotation information, class, arrow, dog, etc. Okay, so annotation value. Okay, so now we've got the functions that act on this stuff. So we've got annotation value, which pulls out annotations somehow. And then we've got this horrible business of the annotation calculus. Okay, so let's review what cases we have not covered. I mean, I'm not super happy with this yet, but let's at least consider what we haven't covered and so on. Okay, and also how this relates to things like missings. Right. So how are we going to cover missings in images? Shadi.
I'm not sure. Were you thinking about some kind of an annotation with a what that says missing?
That's what I'm thinking, maybe. I mean, the alternative is, okay, so let's make the analogous thing for missings, okay? Okay, so for missing, we have the, well, wait a minute, things that have annotation, well, as their elements or something. Okay, so for missing, we have things like this, and I think we also have an option, missing values, don't we? Don't we have a missing function and things? No, missing data rules. And we have, let's take a look at what the missing stuff is. What is missing string? Okay, missing behavior. That's a totally weird thing. Okay, so again, okay, so how are we going to represent? So for example, images. How do we represent missing stuff in images?
I don't know if there was a meeting. Etienne, did you have already that meeting about? I remember seeing that in the calendar because we had certain options that we discussed, and I don't know what has been discussed already with you.
We didn't discuss so much. We didn't discuss.
Okay. Because right now Shadi, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in numeric array we do not support any non-numeric value, like none.
We don't. In image, we don't as well, obviously.
So like the point is, like, if you want to store efficiently missing information for a big number of pixels, we may use a mask, like another row array that contains like a binary array.
Yes.
Or sparse array.
Or a sparse array, if there are not many of
Okay,
them,
so-
sparse array would be.
Okay, so for a small, okay, for the best way to do missing so far is with a mask.
Right.
And either a dense or sparse array.
And
I would
this
say-
opens. Yeah, sorry, Carlo.
Sorry. I would say that goes very well with annotation information. The other option is if we want to use annotation rules, if we can express the missing values as a region, that is our where, and then that is also.
right.
But it really depends if we can express our where with a region. If not, then it becomes kind of impractical, as Julia was saying.
Okay, so let's look at that. I mean, so we could imagine. I mean, okay, we could imagine that in principle we have an image, arrow. Well, I don't even know if this makes any sense, but I mean, we could do something like that. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I don't know. Image seems a bit of a weird specification there. If we can express it as a region, then I think it would make slightly more sense.
Well, okay, but either way, it doesn't matter whether it's an image or, I mean, once it's geometry. Okay, so let me just understand something. We've got, oh, what was I going to say? Masking, the way that masking works. Explain that to me. Where can I put masking? Is it in image operations or can I put it into image itself?
No, it's usually a processing option.
It's what?
Okay.
Like, it's a processing option, like filter this image only here or measure this.
Okay, so if I say, for example, how do I get a nice random image? If I say, what's a good image?
You could do random image.
Okay,
Van
Gogh sunflowers. Oh, for goodness sake. That is funny, but not useful.
If you say picture of an animal or something like that, should work. Van Gogh image, Van Gogh picture.
Picture of owl. Great. Looks smart. Okay.
So, for example, like if you want to find the maximum of this image, you could do, I don't know if blur.
Well, let's try that. I mean, does
I
blur
was thinking
work?
blur is not going to work.
But
It
if I say
should.
masking arrow disk matrix of 40 or something, splatter saw. Okay, so
Right.
what would work here?
Just do a disk. Well, blur doesn't work, but do something like image apply.
No, well, okay, that seems very, very complicated. Okay, go ahead.
And then do a 1 - hash to negate as a function. And then the masking, right.
Okay, there we go. Beautiful. Let's say an owl in the crosshairs or something. Okay. That's nice. Okay, so now we could imagine I mean, we could imagine something where we have some kind of missing data arrow. I mean, I think the annotation thing is more general, and I don't think, the annotations on the image should be able to be any reasonable left-hand side, given the type of data that you're dealing with. So, for example, in this case, if that is a 1, 0, pixel array, so be it. But I'm not quite sure what we're going to do with those annotations on an image. What are we going to do with them? What happens if we say annotation value? What will it do? Or do we not even want that?
You mean, how do we take them out?
Yeah, well, no. I mean, I'm saying annotation value, if the image look, let's say that I carved out the ears of the owl, okay? And I put an annotation that said ears on those ears, right? Then I said annotation, what's that?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think that we have all the use cases for what image annotations will be, but one very common is medical.
Yes, okay, fine, which is a good case of ears and eyes and so on.
Right.
So an image cases will, we presumably want something. All right, so then if that's true, what would annotation value do? I mean, we want highlight image to be able to highlight by annotation, right?
For instance.
Yeah. And ideally something like dynamic image to be able to create an image with annotation.
Okay. Well, and okay, and then we want another case we want is want a way to show explicit labels for annotations within an image. Now, that might also be true for graphics, right? We can imagine doing an annotated in a graphic.
Could it be an option of the annotation as well?
Right. But this annotated might want to display with callouts, for instance.
Yeah, something that I've been wanting to add to highlight image, but I wasn't sure if I should have spent development time doing it myself, or if we want to have generic callout support for graphics, because right now it only works in plot and in plotting functions. We don't have callout in graphics as far as
That's right, because it's a way different problem. It's substantially harder.
Call out in graph. What are you talking about? Sorry.
Call out in graphics is substantially harder, and we're solving case by case for visualization. So it's a whole different,
Right. To do it for generic graphics as opposed to a structured visualization like list plot.
Exactly.
So, but I mean, clearly, so I mean, if we do this, oops. Okay, that's very beautiful. So you're saying, Roger, that the graphics analog of that, why is it so much harder?
Because
well, like calling out a polygon is obviously a different thing from calling out a point.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that's basically what we're solving case by case on. And these are highly requested things. And the visualization team doesn't really work on graphics. Graphics is something the front-end team works on, first of all. Graphics is the low-level
so
thing.
are we in fact solving this problem of callouts and graphics or not?
No, we're not. We're solving it for visualization. There can be another project, and that means that we take away our visualization capacity and try to solve that, or we need to solve it in some other way. So we have a visualization team, and we have a graphics team. The visualization team works on visualization, surprisingly enough.
I wonder whether people like Yutsu and John's group would be in a position. Parth, you're here. Could you at least? Okay. I mean, we just don't have any capacity to do. But I'm not even sure. I mean, John, do you want to comment on this? John has been paying attention here.
Oh, hey, I keep talking and no one hears me. That's why.
No, I needed to quit and start audio again to be heard.
Yeah, the is your question about the capacity or about the problem itself?
Both. I mean, the problem itself algorithmically seems to have been solved for visualization by the visualization team for at least certain cases. Is that a true statement, Roger?
Right. And there's going to be many more cases solved for 12. But I'm just saying that they're yielding not super fast, and we have to kind of work
No,
True.
I understand, but were the graphics people to take your algorithmic solutions and flow them into graphics?
I kind of
that be
think
sensible?
that I think that it would not be at the performance level that we would like. Okay, that's the problem. So our graphics is already way too slow.
Yeah.
I think that.
Well, the issue is this. I mean, okay, look, if you want a call out and we simply don't have call outs, the performance is infinitely slow.
That's true. But I'm just thinking it's not something that you just dump on a team and hope that it's a zero cost solution. It's a major cost solution, and it probably won't be very satisfactory.
Well, I mean, look, things like labeling. By the way, I mean, labeling obviously works naked in the following sense. If I say 1 labeled, 2, 3, 4, 3, that will work like that, right? But if I were to say tooltip there, it will also work, right? I think. Why didn't that work? Doesn't that work? John?
It should.
How is that not working?
Yeah,
This is version 12, by the way. That might be a bug. Yeah, it's something is wrong there. Okay. And by the way, John, for what it's worth, there also are, if you're looking for version 12 bugs, there are cursor bugs. This cursor click situation is wrong here.
sorry, I don't know what you mean by this cursor click situation.
I'm clicking right now, and it's staying as an arrow cursor.
Oh, okay.
Shouldn't be. Okay, this isn't gonna. Oh God, this is a horizontal I-bar cursor in this situation. Right, it didn't go to the insertion cursor.
This is the first I'm seeing of this problem.
Okay, I've been having this problem all day. Maybe a particular build.
So I got the tooltip on a day.
I'm gonna have to go.
Proto.
Okay.
So, I mean, concerning labeling, we did a thing for labeling, but it, it's like something that looks beautiful and seems to work great until you try to really use it in anger. And then you find, various issues with it, some of which are ridiculously hard.
Sorry. Labeling which?
Labeling things in graphics.
Yes. Does it work at all?
Yeah, it works, and in fact, it's used in some graph stuff. But this is why we have graph outputs that are bugs in my group instead, because there are some cases where it doesn't work so well.
So if I say like point.
Yeah.
No, you don't get there through the labeled wrapper.
No. This is something that there is not a top level syntax for, and it's because of issues of fragility in design.
I mean, I think we all agree that this would be highly desirable if we could do it. Do we agree?
If we could do it, yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah.
And the reason we can't do it is
because because you want to do it well.
Yeah.
So like you want your labels not to be clipped at the edge of the graphic. way harder than you might think.
Yeah.
You want labels to not overlap other labels.
Yeah.
You want
Well,
labels
that's
to
hard.
not overlap interesting content.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's go back here. I mean, by the way, this really should be on our long-term list, and I should put this on the long-term list.
And this is definitely not something that my group presently has the resources for.
I understand.
And right now we're juggling, the world of 3D graphics that can't seem to standardize on anything. So,
right.
I think they've very well standardized on chaos.
Yes, I stand corrected.
Okay. Okay. So let's come back to our original discussion. Okay. So there's a question of how we represent a standardized way to represent missing stuff in an image, for example, or for that matter, in a string. I mean, what if a string, like for instance, a genomic string, has missing values in it? String is a more extreme case because an image is case one, things that can have annotations in their wrappers. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Okay, so first question is, so in the annotation rules here that we want, so first point is, the sub case here is where should be able to be anything reasonable. Okay, which means it could be part specifications, it could be an image map, it could be a region geometry. Anything else that it could reasonably be?
Single positions, which I guess maps to points.
Single positions. Maybe it could be an interval.
Not sure for image, but right, for other objects.
Right. So let's just make a list of things that can have annotations in their wrappers, okay? Image, audio, time series.
Image 3D.
Well, that's small difference. Right. Okay,
Graph.
What else?
Graph, which already has the properties, right?
Yes, which we want to get rid of and replace that with annotated. Is Charles here?
Yes, I'm here.
So for graph, you need annotation value, don't you? Because you have a property value mechanism, don't you?
Yes, we have property value, set property, of move property, and such. So a whole set of operations to manipulate properties.
Sorry, what did you say? Oh, you got a set property thing.
Set property, remove property, property list, which provide a list of property because there is user-defined properties beyond the standard.
Okay. All right. Okay. So hold on.
Maybe we should do a set annotation instead of options.
Well, okay. So then you say for graphs you would have a set annotation. Is that right? And the set annotation in the graph would say set annotation of the graph, and then it will be a node spec. Node. How does it work, Charles?
Currently, it's more a list graph, comma, node, or edge, and then property as the second argument, or annotation, second argument.
But so a more replace part kind of syntax would say, given the graph, this node. Well, I see. You're saying, I mean, okay, so hold on. One thing would be something like this, and then the property, which is of the form, prop name arrow value. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, and how do you remove an annotation?
We have remove annotation where you specify that too. So the graph or the graph plus vertex or edge followed
So
by.
is it set, or I mean really set? You know, to my mind, this should be add annotation, because it isn't really setting in the sense of set. I mean, it should be, if it's going to be something like that, it would be add annotation, move annotation.
But
Well,
you can use set to set the value for a variable when it doesn't have a value yet, or when it has a value already. It doesn't really matter.
No, I know that, but set suggests a side effect L value-y type thing, which is not the story here. This is merely returning a graph with the thing added, correct?
Correct, but we made it in sync because we also have that L value aspect in graph with property value with L value. So that's why we use a set instead of just
for God's sake. How does that work?
So essentially you can do,
I really hate this. I mean, that design was just awful.
Well, the design work, it provides the functionality we need.
I know, but it's awful. It doesn't fit in with tons of other stuff. Somehow that design snuck through at a time when I was not paying proper attention. My mistake. But anyway, okay, so you claim that you have an L value form, right, which is different from this, because this is not the L value form. This is taking the graph and returning a new graph, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you claim you have a form in which you have an annotation value, L value. Gosh, this is horrifying. Okay, in which what you're saying is annotation value of graph, comma node, somehow equals, comma prop, prop name equals value. And what does that do? What does it do? There's no L value here. What does this do?
Essentially, what we wanted for performance and efficiency to be able to set it in place. Right?
But what the heck is the semantics of that? But there's no name. What's the name of the thing that's set?
But the set here is the graph. It's actually the symbol is not the graph per se, the instance of the graph is the symbol. So you do set property value of G.
Okay, so you say AAA equals graph of whatever.
Exactly.
So you're saying I say something like this. Okay, oops, let's do, I don't know what we want to do, 5 or something. Okay, so there's our graph. And now what you say is that I can say property value of that graph, comma, what?
Vertex label.
No, which vertex am I talking about?
Oh, you can essentially you put it in a list, so you can do AA, comma 1 and vectors.
But let's say vertex labeling, for example, arrow automatic. Can I do that? What will that do?
No, it should be vertex labels.
Okay.
And then equal automatic.
Here?
Yes.
Like that?
Right.
Oh boy, that is really horrifying. That's really upsetting. It's really horrifying. Do you think people use this a lot?
Yes.
Isn't the syntax kind of similar to what you do in association and in part, though?
We have it over the system. I mean, you haven't created any precedence here.
What are you talking about? This is normally, this would be the function property value would be, this is just really awful. It's really awful.
And this is also the same thing that, you use current value in the front end.
What?
Yeah, and wait a minute. Property value, oh boy, that got all tangled up with entity properties and so on as well.
Stephen, if you do part AAA, 1 equals something, is going to work the same way.
I know.
It's like a symbolic part.
Yeah, I know. Yes, except that that was a design from like 15 years ago that never got finished. And this is not it. Because this isn't a symbolic part. This is a very specific thing that is setting, this isn't a pure symbolic part. That's doing some complicated thing inside that graph structure. Okay, so we're going to have to rip this out. I mean, we'll leave the functionality, obviously, but we're going to have to actually fix this.
How would you do that? What would be your preferred way to do that?
I don't know yet. But certainly this idea of properties is going away. We've got that for entities. We don't want to have properties. It just doesn't make any sense. At the very least, the nomenclature for this is annotations, not properties. But in any case, I mean, with this idea, how does that apply to, for example, images? I mean, would you expect then, with something like this, to be able to set a value for a pixel in an image? That's not how we do it, right? If you want to change, like my friendly owl here, if I want to change it to, how do I reset the value of a pixel in the owl?
You have replace image value or replace pixel value.
What does replace image value do?
It will return an image with the pixel replaced. It's not in place.
Give it the same disk matrix. And then arrow.
Say
0.
arrow red, or yeah, whatever you want.
Yeah. Oops.
I don't think we get these matrices here. It's probably works with a list of pixels. I don't know if I got around to update this to do the general thing, but if you you can put like a mask.
By the way, that just jumped, John, if you care. When I deleted that, the scroll position jumped.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have my eyes on the screen.
I was just deleting around here, and the scroll position jumped to the bottom of content.
Okay.
Oh boy. So, great. Jose, by the way, is asking a question. Well, let's see. Maybe we can see if Jose can join this meeting. He's asking, he wants to use missing values as well. Okay, he's got missing values for geo-elevation data, and he wants to use it as well.
Let me go get him.
Okay. So he's pointing out the background deals with missing in some way in the image case. Is that right?
No, it deals with transparent pixels, which is, I mean,
which is an El Cheapo way of doing missing.
Yeah.
For an image.
But it's also, I mean, it's also taking a real value. So what it is, if you have alpha 0.5, it's half missing, maybe.
Yeah, I understand. So that's another. Oh, this is a case we need to make a note of here, right? So in images, missing is a bit like transparent or partially transparent pixels. By the way, Charles, what drives me crazy about this property thing, I mean, the functionality is quite sensible at some level. I just can't stand the names and the whatever. It may be just a problem of a single word, which would be good. Okay. So what's the right way to do this? Do I have to say image of disk matrix?
Or you can specify an interval, a list 10 through 20, comma 10 through.
There we go. There we've
okay, great.
Japonified the owl or something. Okay. So what's the point? Okay, so that's the way we're doing it so that would be the way that I would expect this to work. Some kind of replace,
Yeah, but trust me, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you lose so much in efficiency by doing that, because you have to recreate the graph object every time.
Well, but look. That's, there's a zillion ways to deal with that don't involve, you do not have to. Well, I don't know how you're storing these graph objects and whether they're. I mean, clearly with an expression, Right, Charles, can you say something useful about that?
No, sure. I mean, like you point out, I mean, we can always find a way to implement it efficiently with a function like replace graph, replace property. That shouldn't be a problem.
Right. Well, okay. So fine. I just think the semantics of forcing something like this is just wrong. But anyway, okay. But let's go back to, okay, let's loop back. I don't like the number of mechanisms that we have here. It's too many. Right, so let's go through again what we're talking about. So we've also now got this notion of annotation, add annotations, remove annotations. So this is sort of indirectly addressing annotations, which is, as you say, like a symbolic part system.
Hello.
Hi. You're in the middle of a whole discussion about annotations and missing values and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So remind us what your use in geo-elevation data is.
Yes, so the problem with geo-elevation data is that sometimes we ask for the elevation in a region and say we have elevation for land, but not for the sea. And so we have to return something, and we want to return the result.
Why don't we have elevation? I'm sorry, why don't we have elevation for the ocean? I mean, it's either bathymetry or it's the surface elevation, right?
Yes, but for example, okay, another example is we have a region which is a rectangular region, but then we project it, and then it has a different shape. So we want now to represent these empty spaces.
I see. But I'm sorry, the geo-elevation for ocean, we do have that, don't we?
We have data of lower resolution.
For the bathymetry, for the
Yes.
for the ocean floor.
Exactly.
Is that what we're returning? We're not returning the ocean surface?
Well, the idea was, what happens if you are interested only in the area of land, or having the data which is the original data?
Right. I'm sorry that this is really irrelevant to this meeting, but I think geo-elevation data should have an option to determine whether you want the surface of the ocean or the sea floor.
Okay, yeah. We have discussed...
Or when you want the thing missing. I mean, because that's the other case you're describing.
Yes, so the main case is like in GeoImage we have background, and then we can say if the world is in the bone projection, so the background is going to be red because it's outside the world. So we have the similar situation to return elevation for the world, some other projection.
Right, but I'm just suggesting. I mean, I don't know. We can include ocean floor or something. I don't know, something like that. Okay, but let's come back to this. So let's review again what we've got here. We've got these cases of add an annotation, which is really weird, but it's a convenient thing to do. If you've got a bunch of annotation rules for an image, you don't want to have to take the thing apart. You would prefer to just say, I mean, maybe this is append annotation or annotation append, annotation delete. So in other words, then what you would do is you would say annotation append of this image, and then you would have a where arrow what. Does that make any sense? And that would return an image again with the new annotations and with additional annotation rules.
So one slight difference than the current thing that we have implemented in audio, which is, I mean, as I said multiple times, just a prototype to see how things work. So we built a little bit on the property values. So each of the annotation has a label in addition to a where and what. So when you add an annotation or remove an annotation, you can specify which one by a label.
Okay.
So that it is easier to overwrite an annotation rather than having to delete and then append a new one.
Well, so you're saying the notion is an annotation replace.
It's an annotation set, I would say. And you set the part corresponding to that label.
Yeah, but it's not a set because it's not an in-place operation.
No. So what we use is just audio annotate, a specific function for audio.
No, I understand. But so what you're suggesting is that so this is replace not by where, not necessarily by where, but perhaps by tag.
Correct.
Okay, so let's look at the other cases here. Okay, so in this where arrow what, how would we put a tag in there?
So one way of doing it would be grouping them by tag. So you have tag 1 goes to where 1 goes to what 1, etc., etc. Tag 2 goes to a similar thing. That would be one approach.
Okay, hold on. So let's look up here at, we're saying annotated of expert. Speaker is Bob, emotional state is happy.
You could argue that the keys here are the tags, and the values are the values, the what.
Well, okay, but I mean, in this case, what you'd be saying is, okay, so let's look at the full thing. So this would then say, annotation rules, arrow, and then it would say here, let's say interval from some time 1 to time 2. Speaker is Bob, emotional state is happy.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is essentially equivalent, just inverting the order of things, having the tag to be the key.
No, but I mean, there's two different things you might want here. One is replace Bob by Robert. Or another thing you might want is say replace this interval by some other, say actually at the end of that interval he was unhappy.
Yeah. So I guess the advantage or why it makes sense to have tags as the first one in this hierarchy is that, say for audio, you might want to annotate the speakers. So you'll have a speakers tag and then a collection of intervals and values. And then you might want a transcription tag and then intervals and values.
All right. So what you're saying,
it's equivalent. It's just ordered differently.
No, I know, but then I don't think the replace is the place where you want. So then it will be different. It will be speakers arrow, and then you would go time interval.
A list of where goes to what.
Yes. Okay, but is this what you meant by the tagging?
Yes.
Okay, so what do you mean by replacing it? So then you're replacing that whole bulk tag thing. Is that correct?
Exactly. And you can specify, for example, a deeper structure. For example, you could specify speakers, comma, where, for example.
Okay, so you're proposing that in annotation replace, that one could say in some way or another here. Speakers, comma, time interval, arrow, blah.
Correct.
Doesn't seem obviously crazy. I mean, in other words, you know, I have to say, the correct way to do time intervals would be with some kind of event series here, I would think.
The problem is it doesn't really support intervals.
Well, it should. By the way, an interesting comment on our live stream is, why not use a fifth color channel for missing?
Seems more like a hack than a solution.
I agree. We also support.
What's transparency? It's a hack too.
Yeah, but it's a common hack that everyone uses.
Yes.
And it's still creating a lot of issues every time we try to deal with that properly. We spend a month before. Yes, we spend a month before the summer trying to understand if we are being consistent enough with alpha channel handling, and it's a rabbit hole. Like, it's really a bad hack to use it to store information. It is like when if you like to use like a specific color value for missing data. I mean, you can do that, but it's really a bad hack.
No, I understand, but the point of a fifth color channel is you're not doing that. You've got another channel.
I would rather keep it as a separate option under image.
So if you have a grayscale with the like 3.
Yeah, all right, okay. Yeah, you're right. A grayscale with the gray value, the transparency, and the missingness.
Yep, that's crazy.
Well, I mean, okay, so let me make another suggestion. Okay, right now our image data is an ordinary tensor, so to speak. What if image data could have an association as its backbone? So in other words, where it was explicitly named, you know, red color channel, blue color channel, transparency. So in other words, what I'm suggesting, depending on how interleaving is set, right? It depends which way around the interleaving.
Break every code in existence.
Well, I understand. I'm just asking in principle how it should work, right? I mean, you could imagine, I'm not saying it's a good idea, but you could imagine something where you've got, I don't know which way around people typically have the interleaving set. How do they? It's typically triples, right?
Yes.
Right. So I mean, in principle, those triples could have an association in them. I mean, in terms of the right way to do it, this is not an obviously stupid way to do it. In terms of how the code actually works, it's hopeless right now. Fair statement? Or do you think this is not a good way to do it, even if the code could work this way?
I'm very unconvinced about this.
Yeah, it's going to be very inefficient to handle these everywhere.
Well, okay, yeah.
I think it's worse. It's going to be cumbersome for also to operate. And I'm not saying that what we have here in this note it's less cumbersome, but I think I'm not sure. I mean, let's reverse. I'm sure we are not going to solve this thing soon.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that. And, okay, all right. So let's go back here to. Okay, we've got these various different approaches, right? So we've got annotation information, which is the whole thing annotation, which is equivalent to annotated, and presumably annotated of thing goes to, you know, annotation information option if it can. Is that right?
Yep.
That would be nice. And I was even going to suggest, as you say, we're proposing a lot of workflows. Do we really want to annotate it, or do we want to just have annotations for the objects that can store them and then create more of these objects like the annotated string or the rich string, whatever we want to call it, that can store these options?
Well, because there are cases where the thing has, look, annotated is perfectly reasonable in a time series. You want to be able to put that in there and then maybe have the thing, you know, I think this is what we discussed last time, the thing auto convert to annotation rules, right? For entry of the thing, it is convenient to put the symbolic wrapper around a single element.
Right. And then in other cases that it can't put it under annotation rules or information, it
Then
stays
it has
as
to
it.
stay symbolic.
Right.
It doesn't have any
Okay.
choice. It probably won't do much with it, but it won't have any choice.
Okay.
I mean, it's then just
I'm wondering whether we need two functions. If you need annotated as just an inert thing and annotate as the thing that tries to dig it down and, you know, do an actual evaluation into something else.
not sure. Why do you think you might need that?
I don't know that we do. I mean, I'm just wondering whether there's cases where it's going to sort of continually try to bury down as you are trying to work with things, or
I see. Well, okay.
or
that's a
you know,
reasonable question.
in terms of pattern matching, you know.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Okay, so that's not obviously wrong. Okay, to have an annotate that turns into annotated if it has to, but generally, I mean, we could. Yeah, I mean that's a sort of in the concept of that's a last resort.
It's true. How would you do? I mean, usually you have images that are already. Let's say there's no missing value in the image, and you want to add missing values. How would you do that?
You'd use annotation rules.
And that's an option. So in which?
Okay, so the way you would do that.
Function? You do image again? You wrap image in image?
No, the way you would do that, honestly, that would suggest that this is called annotate.
Yeah.
And that in that case, what you would do is you would say annotate the image with the where is whatever it is, you know, disk matrix 30 arrow missing.
And this is essentially what we have for audio annotate. This is what I was mentioning before, with the addition of this tagging. But it's the same mechanism that you're describing there.
And it could also be just a what. I'm not sure why we should.
Well, yeah, but so okay, so in that case, the what is well, okay, so this is where it gets complicated because the what might be something like, you know, label arrow painting or something like that.
If it's just the what, then it lives in annotation information. If it has a where, it lives in annotation rules.
No, I understand that, but the question is whether the outer wrapper to insert that could be the same outer wrapper.
It seems like it could.
How?
It seems a clear distinction.
Isn't it ambiguous?
Well, I mean, a where is missing.
What do you mean? No, but how do you? The problem is if the payload, if the what is itself a rule, how do you distinguish that case?
But the key of that rule is definitely not where.
Yeah, but what if it is? What if you happen to say 3 arrow, whatever?
Okay, yeah, I see your point. It seems like a corner case, but yeah, you're right.
We have to think about it. I'm not sure. There may be a way to disambiguate it. Okay. But.
And do we really need these options? Or could we just do everything with annotate?
What do you mean?
Like the first options of image in image.
These things?
Annotation, yes.
I think we need those. Where would we put the annotations without that?
Oh, so you mean internally? I mean, we could have an internal way of storing things and.
Yeah, but why not expose it? I don't see why we shouldn't expose it. I mean,
do we expose how it's constructed an image and an audio?
Yes, image data. I don't know, audio. I assume,
but not really We don't expose the internal construction.
But for example, meta information is there.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, you can also do information of the image, but we never expose how it's encoded inside.
We pretend we've exposed it with image data.
Yeah.
I don't really know what the relationship between image data and what the actual storage is.
It's not that we pretend. It's
a packed array of some kind.
Now it's a numeric array. It was a row array, but it's that thing. But it's similar to like vertex list for a graph. Like is not giving you, like, it's not displaying the full content of the construct. Is just giving you one specific part, which is in that case a pixel value.
Right.
Because otherwise, what we just need is an annotate thing to add stuff. Maybe something to extract all the annotation, something to clear all the annotation, and with that you can do everything.
But the only way to store it meaningfully is if it lives in the input firm, and the only clean way that I am aware of storing it in the input firm is to have options, at least for audio and image.
Yeah, I mean, it could be annotation inside. I mean, it's our internal choice if we don't expose it.
It needs to be exposed because it needs to live in the input firm.
I mean, if you look inside a classifier, there's a whole bunch of stuff. It's in the input form, but it's not exposed. It's not documented anywhere.
Right. Okay, but okay, you're suggesting the possibility that you annotate and the annotations sort of vanish into the ether, but are stored somehow, and you can get them back out again.
Yeah. And that's why you don't even need labels and stuff. I mean, if you can grab all of, I mean, there was a debate about referring to a specific annotation by a label, which I find a bit weird because it starts being a lot of label. Like there's a where, there's a what, then there's a label associated to the annotation in order to refer to it from outside, which I find a bit complicated.
All right, let's try. So you're proposing. Okay, so this is Etienne's new proposal.
Sorry.
Okay, so the idea here is then that there is a pure function annotate.
Yeah. And this just adds an annotation. Yeah. And it can be a what, or it can be a where what. And any object.
Okay. So let's say object. This is a where, or a what, etc.
Or just a what. And this would return either the same object if it can allow to store annotation inside, or an annotated wrapper.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so fine. It returns an object which might in fact use that very same thing, but we might or might not choose to document or emphasize the fact that what it's actually doing with annotation rules and so on.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there will be something to grab all the annotations, maybe called just annotations or get annotations, I don't know.
Which is the equivalent of annotation value, I guess.
Yes. Okay, but then, so annotations there, and maybe it has a selector as well, as an optional selector.
That's a bit complicated. Like, how do you?
Well, it can have whatever selector it feels like. Like for example, it could get the annotations for a particular range of times. I mean, that selector could depend on what the object is.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. I think annotation
so you're
value
proposing what exactly was proposed before. I don't think there is any difference from this and the previous proposal up to now. Except Etienne is saying we shouldn't store it in an option, but for audio and image, we don't really want to change the structure of an audio and an image. And in that case, the only solution is having an option to store it.
No, Etienne is, look, the difference in what Etienne is saying, he's pivoting our point of view, not the actual technical implementation, really. Right? The point of view is that there's a function called annotate, there's a thing called annotations that pulls the annotations out, and
What I'm saying is that this is what we're proposing before, just the name is slightly different.
Right.
Annotations instead of annotation value, and annotate is what we called many names, annotation append, set annotation, etc., etc.
Okay, so
Audio
annotation,
annotation.
replace is something we would then need as well, because it's got to be able to replace an annotation, right?
But wait,
Yeah.
okay, we could have something that, to replace, you grab the annotation, then you do whatever change you want to do, and then you put them back in the object.
But that is horribly, horribly massive if you have a lot of annotations and you want to change a little part.
What I'm confused, annotation replace, is that there will be all kind of annotation, and how do you specify one? It's kind of the selector business.
This is why we were trying to have this tag system as well, in addition to the where and what.
Which
Well,
makes it, in my opinion, complicated as well.
Yeah, I understand. But let's go through this list here, and let's look at the way that we're already using annotations in Graph. Okay? So let's ask the question, does this work for Graph? That's a Charles question. That's effectively set property for Graph.
Right. So you can set the property of the graph, which is in general for graph is not useful. Usually it's set of a property of.
No. I know, but it's got a where. So it's you can say set it for a particular vertex.
Right.
Okay. And annotations is property value effectively. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And okay, so let's look for a string, for example. Okay, how does Etienne's proposal work for a string? So we'd say annotate, we've got our string, and then we say, so the where arrow what might be the interval 4, 8 is the gene BRCA1. See what I'm saying? What does that return?
This will be annotated.
Okay, we could decorate that a little bit more. We could say annotated object or something. Or we could have a thing called annotated string that's specific to strings.
That's what I was proposing for when or for objects that we don't have a container. Maybe we just introduce the container.
Yeah, or we give an error. I mean, in other words, if you say annotate, for example, let's imagine that I did this. Let's say I said annotate this number. I think we just give an error. Do you agree? And I don't think there's anything useful we can do there.
I agree. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a sort of a weird up value case where we are, is there an up value case where we're saying 1, 2, 3, annotate for hello. Well, actually, the correct thing to do here is to return unevaluated. Not to give an error, but just to return unevaluated. Because then in this case here, that could perfectly well, if you say list plot of that or something, it could perfectly well work at some point.
I mean, I think this is, the sort of thing where it comes back to my suggestion that we have the active and the inactive thing. That, this would be, like tooltip or labeled or whatever, where it doesn't really do anything until something else gets to it.
Right. And I think
either the visualization code looks at it and goes, annotated of something, and I'm going to do whatever with it, or the typesetting comes across it and says, this is going to map into some functionality in the, when it gets displayed by the front end, or, but you don't need something that's trying to bury in that case.
Mm-hmm. But I still think that second case that Stephen has up there doesn't make sense. Probably that should still return an error message. There is no part 4 through 8 in that number.
Who says that's a part?
Yeah, right. Because I mean, in general, this is going to be, you're going to be able to say annotate time series, blah, 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 time 1, time 2.
That makes sense. I think what we said is that the where should be any object that makes sense or could be a part of the object.
Fine. But okay, so the question here is this useful? Is this kind of inner annotation useful? Or is it only useful to put annotations into wrappers? See, I have a feeling that like in a time series, I mean, I think it will be useful to be able to enter this.
I agree. I guess in different places we'll find uses for this.
Okay, but can it be the same function, annotate? In other words, if this thing is a time series ultimately, and one value is annotated there, that? Go ahead.
What does graph do now with this? If you add a style to one node of the graph, does that stay in place or does it get moved into the property?
It's moved to the property. I mean, we have a whole list of, style, tooltip, annotation.
Right.
So it is then moved out to a centralized option, basically, Charles. Is that right?
Right. So we move it back to a property.
No. Wait a minute. Where does it get put? If I put these things here, do those get moved into a central option which says the labels of every node, or does it get localized as a wrapper around the node?
Just look at input form of AAA.
They're moved to a central, which vertex label.
Fine.
That's the option.
I see. Okay. So I mean, I happen to set it here, but I mean, if I'd set a specific vertex label, how would I set the label for 4, for the thing number 4? How would I set the specific vertex label for?
So if you use property values, you do in a list, AA, comma 4, and then the value.
Funky. Okay, I understand. Okay.
Yeah. So in the case of the time series you have as well, we'll just move the annotated 4 into the centralized place, whether that's the exposed annotation rule.
Yes, right. But so does this want to be, can this be that same function, annotate, or should it be annotated?
I think it should be annotated.
I kind of think that's safer.
Well, I mean, so here's another case, which, I mean, I don't think necessarily forces it one way or the other, but it's worth thinking about, is what happens if you have annotate of a list, of the list 1, 2, 3? Right, does it try to bury down into the list and apply?
Well, it could. Yeah, I mean, 2 goes
right. I mean, it could, but you may not want it to, in certain circumstances, and so that's another reason for having the inert version.
Right. So that's this. Right. That would do that. Is that what you're imagining?
Something like that. Yes, but yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's look then at. So we would need annotation replace, annotation delete, probably. Well.
Or clear annotations to clear everything. I don't know.
Yeah, we might want a full clear annotations. Well, actually, it'd probably be delete annotations. would be the natural thing. But in this case, if you want to remove a single annotation, you could probably have a you have to have a right-hand side that represents that it isn't there.
Question. So if we change the value that is annotated, would it change the annotation?
Well, that's a really good question. Right.
Because
If we
in
do a
the-
replace part, what does it do?
Right. That's the calculus of annotations. That is a whole big topic of its own. Let's not open that now.
Well,
Yeah, I need to leave soon.
yeah, so do I.
It's past midnight for Julio.
Sorry. Because
Okay, but just let's just raise that for 1 second. The annotation preservation function sounds like some kind of
no, I mean
rescue thing.
what I have,
society or
Save the panda.
what I have in mind is that we have time series insert, so I can insert a value at a given time, and so what happens is this annotated as the whole value, or the value it's 4 and I change the value 4 and I keep annotation, and what if I insert and I try to insert another annotation in?
Yeah. So this does apply in the annotation propagation. So you could envision having an option in time series insert that says annotation goes to none or inherited that controls the behavior. So you will return a new time series. Do you want to inherit the annotations that you already have? Do you want not to inherit? Do you want to do some custom behavior? And I think some of this is already present with graph.
Is it, Charles?
Graph properties.
Right. So for the 12, you're actually implementing inheritance of property in graph, which is based on user workflow and request. So you can take a function. You can build a graph and then you do neighborhood graph, and then we preserve the property appropriately. And this is what we are building right now in the prototype build. It's not per se a calculus of annotation, but it's more an inheritance of annotations based on operations.
Okay, so you're saying in this case there's an inheritance of annotations, but the problem is it's not obvious. Inheritance of annotations, e.g. in graph. Okay, but it's not obvious that these annotations are divisible, so to speak. See what I'm saying? So in other words, let me give an example. So let's say that let me give an example within a graph, okay? Let's say that your graph represented a mechanical linkage structure, okay? And you are labeling a subgraph as being, the stable core of the structure, let's say, right? Right, with me so far? So now let's imagine that I pull out one of the members of that, one of the edges in that stable core. Do you really want it to still stay it's the stable core? See what I'm saying? In other words, it's like, is it an intensive or extensive quantity or something? In other words, because one thing it could say is, oh, those are the beams that were added by, Bob's construction company, right? And clearly, you take out one beam, the other beams were still added by Bob's construction company. Right. But okay,
right. So in our case, we more focus on the case of workflows. That means we provide the ability, an easy ability to actually, remove those ones or set them or allow the inheritance. It was essentially that, because there's no, like in your example, there's no general solution, right? If you work with.
No, I know that, but so we need to distinguish between annotations that come in clumps versus annotations that are basically intensive quantities.
I am not sure such a distinction is quantifiable.
But yeah, so that's why for us, from the user, from the request from user, we just saw that is that annotation or inheritance depend on the function and kind of.
No, I understand. I think I've requested this thing myself. In other words, if you make certain nodes red, you don't want the redness of those nodes to disappear when you extract a subgraph.
Right. But now, depending on the operation, do you want the coordinate to be maintained or not? It depends on all that. And
yes, I understand. Shouldn't disappear for in subgraph extraction. Okay, but should coordinates be preserved?
But then maybe a property that's not redness should disappear.
Exactly.
I mean, what about the weight or the capacity? You know, if you look at your network in a different way, or the flow, or a user-specified property.
Right. So what that means is that what you're saying is that these operations you're doing, so you can either put the information into the operations, or you can put the information into something, into some, okay, so there are two ways to do it that I would imagine. One is in an operation that is done, say what annotations should be preserved. That's case number one. Or when the annotations are inserted, say what operations should preserve them. Right, those seem to me to be the two obvious possibilities.
In the second case, who should say that?
I'm not sure.
Annotate? Right.
Well,
it's insane to ask the users.
And that can have a strange side effect. I mean, it's...
Yeah.
Which one? Which?
The second case. I mean, it's hard to predict. I mean, if somebody...
Yes, I agree. So this is probably better.
Right.
That one is probably...
Especially because we could have user custom created functions or operations, right? That we don't know they exist.
Well, I know, but then, right, but in that case, they're not going to be preserved by default. Unless you have an option that says, you know, annotation preservation function.
Yep, I think we should have that. And
but which way round is that? Is the annotation preservation function that's in an operation, or is it in the operand?
I think in the operation.
The operation is the one that...
I need to drop out now.
Okay, see ya.
See ya.
Right.
Well, I mean, from my experience in terms of annotation preservation function, so, you know, if it's a function in our sense of functions, that means you actually have to define it, and it's a non-trivial, you know, thing to define based on operations.
Okay, so wait a minute. So look, what we basically want then, what you're suggesting is we want an annotation preservation option. Okay, and so then that could have a value that lists options to, you know, annotations to preserve somehow. I don't know how it says that though.
So in our case, what happened is that it depends on the function, right? So currently the proposal essentially we have such an option, whatever we call it. You can say automatic, inherited, or none. Right, so those are kind of the three default ones. And if you use subgraph, you know, we will tell you exactly, you know, if you say automatic, what we preserve. If you say inherited, we copy all the property coming from the original graph.
Well, okay, so let me specify some things. So if we said all, it means preserve everything.
Right.
If you say none, nothing, obviously. And automatic is certain properties thought to be useful for that operation.
And what we had thought for audio when we were thinking about tagged annotation is that you could actually give it a list of annotation tags. So speaker is preserved.
All right. So a list of tags. So tag 1, tag 2. Okay, but so what does that look like in terms of the structure? So in the annotate where we've got where, arrow, what, that means in that case that would have to say that it would be tagging. So we would be saying the where. Well, how does this work? I
have a notebook If you want, I can show what the current implementation that we have looks like, if that would help.
I guess so, yes. Fine. Go ahead and share if you want.
Okay, let me just retrieve the correct notebook a second.
Unless you want to send me the notebook.
I might do it on my machine just so I'm sure it well, hopefully it works. And I will be sharing, hopefully. Oh, I don't know where this and that.
But also, Stephen,
Okay.
I really think we want the preservation function or something like that, because both wheres and whats we may want to modify as we are moving them to the new one. Think about audio pad, and we have to add an offset, time offset.
So
that's
this,
a good point.
So the structure is slightly different rather than what you propose. What we're discussing with tag goes to where.
So what is this
I have a slightly more complicated structure with an additional metadata field, which can, for this purpose, can be completely ignored. So in this case, you have a tag, and then this is the main data, which is a list of, in this case, where and value and what are in the same association. They could be as easily separated. This is just a convenience way of storing them. So you have a tag and then a where and what. And
you have two levels of tag. You've got beat and then you've got data.
So forget the data level. This is just a convenience to store some additional meta information, which I'm completely happy to drop. If that. This is just how it came up.
That's the whole where, comma, what.
Yeah. This is just stemming from some existing.
Okay, so this is basically the form I was describing. It's a tag, arrow, where, arrow, what.
Exactly. And to set it, you can set the annotation for the whole audio object, which will then go in the annotation rules option, and you can inspect it with annotation value. But you could also set just a tag. You set the tag TS to this value, for example, and it parses it automatically, etc., etc. So this allows you to change just the annotation corresponding to that tag. So you can have this, and here I'm not appending any annotation. I'm just changing the annotation corresponding to the tag TS. And for getting it, you have a similar kind of part-like specification. So you can retrieve a single annotation. Forget this data level is really ugly. It should really be killed. And then you can extract a single part of the annotation. Now, the thing that I added that you were discussing is some selection mechanism. So in this case, you could select annotation from all tags from a specific interval or list of intervals, or a specific time or a list of times, or a specific annotation rather than all annotation for all of the previous selectors, but you could also define a custom selector using. I mean, this is you don't need to consider this. This is just
but wait a second.
playing
Wait a
with
second. The main point here. Look, and we should wrap up for this meeting.
Yeah, definitely.
But the main meta point here is, for audio, you have a certain set of kind of tagging and annotations that you want.
Yeah.
For graphs, we have a certain set of tagging, or is it? The question is, how universal is this? In other words, is it the case that there's a where, a tag, and a what?
Yes. So that is accurate. That is how this format works, and the what could be whatever thing.
Right.
There's no restriction on the what. We have restriction on the where just because we are dealing with audio. But
no, I understand. But the problem with this is that the fact that some things don't need the tags, everything needs a where unless it's global, and we're currently distinguishing the global case. Well, actually, Etienne was proposing to not distinguish the global case in terms of the original annotate function. But then when we were discussing whether we need to distinguish it in the original annotate function.
Correct. Do you want me to stop sharing?
Sure. Okay, so the question here, I mean, we could standardize on requiring a tag for annotate. In
I
other
don't
words,
think that would be terrible.
No, I think it depends on the object and the use and the workflow, right? Graph mesh, while similar workflow, which doesn't match with what, how you play with annotation in audio, right? For a graph, for example, a vertex annotation, weight is annotation, coordinate is annotation. And you do shortest path, maximum flow, they use those annotation in a specific way.
Yeah, so what I'm saying here is that for example, vertex label could be the tag of the annotation. So it would just be a renaming rather than...
It's not per se tag, that's the whole thing, because the vertex level by itself is an option, right? Especially when we do the realization.
I see.
Right? As well as in the operation, you can do a subgraph, you can specify the vertex level globally, right? Which is kind of integrate with the calculus of annotation. We already kind of roughly have that implicitly, even though we haven't said it's an inheritance of property, right? So.
Oh boy, guys, this is complicated. We're going to have to continue. It's unfortunately, this is complicated. It involves many groups. I don't know whether there are people here who feel that they don't need to be here. I think we got to schedule another hour and a half to talk about this. I mean, I think we're going to get this nailed. I think my prediction, my prediction is that what will happen is that we will realize that annotate should be able to be given a structure whose form depends on what is being annotated, so that we don't have to standardize, because I don't think there is a standardization. That's my prediction. I mean,
that makes sense.
The only possible, or alternatively, the other way that this could fall out. The trouble is there are two. Okay. In a sense, what's happening is, I don't know why I'm thinking of some crazy thing about fiber bundles, but it reminds me of this. There's kind of there are things like the node of a graph, the time in a time series or an audio sequence, the position in an image, right? Those are on some base space. There's something that live in there's something that have some, what can I say? They have, I don't know, and it's not quite a manifold exactly, but there's some, I don't know, geometrics, not really geometric. There's some sort of, okay. Then on the other hand, there are tags, and the tags live in a completely abstract world where you can just name anything you want as a tag, right? And I think what we're saying is that we sometimes want things to have a sort of spatial localization, where I say spatial in quotes because it might be time and it might be nodes in a graph or something. And we sometimes want them to have some kind of semantic localization with the tag.
And sometimes both.
Exactly. My guess is those are not the only categories of localization that we want. That is that, those are just two cases, I claim. I claim there are other cases. I don't know exactly what they are. In other words, what is the difference? The conceptual difference between, here's what is the difference? What is the difference between the sort of coordinatized version of this? Some of these are kind of coordinates, and some of them are in some completely abstract space where where it's sort of in a categorical space where you can name anything.
So the problem is that there can be a bit confusion between the tag and the what, because you could use the tag to express what the annotation contains.
Yes.
So there is some ambiguity there.
Well, okay, but okay, the what itself could be an association that, so one possibility is, okay, every annotation we are currently considering involves some form of where. except for global annotations, correct?
Yes.
And one of the things that we had considered before was that the what was always an association, which means it always gets some kind of tag. Well, no, it doesn't really get a tag. I'm sorry, it doesn't get a tag. It gets a, what kind of a thing is this, which is different. Oh, shoot, yeah. How to think about this? See, I think what's happening is, we're basically saying an annotation can be anything. And then that's on the one hand. On the other hand, we're saying annotations have to have certain properties, which gets us into this calculus of annotations business. All right, we need to continue this at a different time, sadly. I'd be happy to go on, but I know, I'm supposed to do something else. And all right, I hope we can get this scheduled within a few days so we haven't lost context here. Maybe people can think offline about this problem. Yeah. See, we want to be able to pick up annotations by their coordinate, by their tag, possibly even by their content.
And this is why I included that weird selector with a pure function that gives you.
No, I understand, by content, yeah. Right. See, yeah. Okay. Look, I think the two people who are most advanced in this are Charles and Carlo. So maybe we could ask those two to have a conversation offline to talk about that. They're very different. Those are two well-developed annotation systems that are rather different.
Yeah, we can see if we can. The graph one is the most mature, so I can meet with Charles and see if we can try to inch the audio one towards the graph one.
Yeah, or vice versa. I'm not worried. Listen, with the graph one, cosmetic renaming is not going to be a huge problem.
Okay.
Sound reasonable, Charles?
Yes, yes.
Okay, all right, good stuff. Thank you all. Thanks to people on the live stream, and we'll continue soon.
Bye.
See you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.